An international symbol of strength and resistance, of power to the people. So, my friends, I want you to stand to your feet and help me bring to the stage Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Stacey Walker. Are you all ready for a Green New Deal? Are you all ready to provide justice for our Native communities? Are you all ready to create and demand millions of jobs in the United States of America and to reclaim our future? About how we respond to crisis. And in crisis, some people waver, some people shrink, some people choose to bow to cynicism and to give up our future and to say that all hope is lost. That is what a lot of people do in crisis. But the people who change the world are the people who refuse to accept and who refuse to accept our decline. They're the people who understand and know that our future is whatever we choose it to be. And I don't know about you, but I refuse and reject and absolutely will not accept the choice of, I refuse to accept the choice of leaving a planet that is diminished and dying to the next generation. I refuse to choose that. And because we refuse to choose that, then what we have no choice to do is to act. We have to act. Because all of us, whether you're here in Iowa or whether you're my family from the Bronx or from Puerto Rico, all of us are being impacted by the climate crisis. Every single one of us. There are folks, almost right after I got sworn in, there was a Republican member that told me that caring about the climate was elitist. Yeah, elitist. As though billionaires aren't buying up their enclaves thinking they can protect themselves from this. What's elitist is thinking this isn't a problem. What is elitist is thinking that you can buy yourself immunity from the floods and the wildfires and the droughts. That is what is elitist. What's elitist is thinking that you can sit on a pile of money and you'll be okay while your neighbors aren't. That is elitist. And it's a bunch of bull. So shortly after we got in, shortly after sworn in, we introduced the Green New Deal resolution. And immediately, the reactions were all over the place. I mean, anyone who has had the misfortune of turning on Fox News understands how fixated they are. And, but it is very powerful, because since then we've had several hearings, and we've known and seen almost a conspiracy in a way. Because ExxonMobil knew exactly what was happening and exactly what was going to happen in the 1970s. Let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about brass tacks. Because what they did is that they had an inkling that carbon emissions could increase global temperatures to unsustainable levels due to the burning of fossil fuels. They knew this, they had that inkling. So they dumped tons of money in scientific studies in the 1970s. We interviewed and we questioned the scientists ourselves. They had models going back decades predicting 415 parts per million in the year 2019, in the 1970s. And what did they do? Did they change their models? No. Did they change their business? No. Did they sound the alarm? No. No, they dumped millions of dollars in lobbying a campaign of doubt. And that is exactly why we have to acknowledge that the climate crisis is not an accident. Do you really? It is not an accident. It is not a coincidence, it is a consequence. And that is why we need to connect the dots when it comes to the climate crisis. Do you really believe that if oil and gas were not one of the most profitable things in the world, that we would be burning our planet to our destruction? Do you really believe that? Nobody does. Nobody does. The reason we are in this crisis is because oil and gas has been one of the most profitable industries of the modern era. And when we talk about fighting money in politics, what we're talking about is fighting big oil. We're talking about fighting Wall Street. We're talking about fighting big pharma. We're talking about fighting endless wars. That's what fighting big money means. And like we said in New York, when we were running a long shot campaign for Congress against one of the most powerful and wealthy members, is that we've got people and they've got money. But here's the thing about big money, is that big money is very lonely because we've got people on our side. The thing about billionaires is that there's not too many of them. And the only reason they're able to try to purchase influence in their elections is when people aren't actively coming together and stitching our movements together in order to combat the growth and in order to combat the influence of big money. And like I said last night, let me tell you something. This movement is real. This movement is growing. Don't let anyone convince you that no one cares about climate change. Last night, we were in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and held the largest rally of the presidential cycle last night in Council Bluffs, in Iowa. 2,400 people in Council Bluffs last night to talk about these issues. Because we know, and one of the things that I said last night, is that there's a lot of talk about unity. There's a lot of talk about unity in this moment, but very little talk about what we're unifying under. Because the thing is that Trump is a symptom. He is a symptom of much deeper problems. He didn't fall into the White House. He didn't fall in there. He was elected, which means we've got deeper issues to deal with because there was a lot of discontent leading up to that moment. So there is no way that we're going to get through this moment without guaranteeing health care to every American. We can't, because here's the thing, is that we can beat him, but we have to vaccinate ourselves against something like this ever happening again. And the way we inoculate ourselves The way we inoculate ourselves from late-stage, hyper-capitalistic concentration of wealth among the very, very few is with a labor movement. The way we inoculate ourselves from continuing to burn up our planet at unsustainable level, triggering feedback loops that we have not even begun to comprehend, is by honoring indigenous wisdom and allowing it to guide our climate policy. The way that we preserve our systems is by transitioning to principles of universality. That means I want you clothed, I want you educated, I want you paid a living wage, no ifs, ands, or buts. And what that also means, and what Naomi talked about as well, is directly, consciously combating white supremacy in the United States of America. Because I, for the life of me, cannot understand why we get so panicked about terrorist activity all over the world, and we don't seem to recognize it in our own backyard. And I want to talk about this a little bit, because when we first introduced the Green New Deal, we talk about frontline communities. We talk about bringing it straight to communities that were left behind, rural communities, poor communities, Flint, the South Bronx, Baltimore. We talk about putting these communities first, and one of the first things that we heard from folks is just worry about the solar panels, leave the social justice stuff behind, always. And it's funny how that's always the case. We're always telling people, and somehow the big consultants are always telling you, race makes everything complicated, or talking about poverty makes everything complicated. It was almost a taboo word to talk about poverty in Washington, D.C. The reason for that, and I want to tell you a little story, is one of the things that we know, too, is none of these policies are that new. We have done this before. We have done this before. But let me tell you a little story about how these systems got dismantled. Because we started to treat housing as a right and developing robust, beautiful, invested public housing in the United States. We treated college education as a right. It was free or virtually free to all Americans until when? In New York City, we had a system, CUNY, and it was virtually tuition free. When did they start charging tuition? When schools and colleges began to get integrated. When racial integration came to many of our institutions of higher education, we then started to transitioning to economic discrimination. So when we talk about establishing systems of universality, anti-racism is a very important part of that. Because this idea that, neoliberalism just, et cetera, just dismantled it, what were the tools of that? The tool of that was the myth of the quote-unquote welfare queen, is this idea that I don't want to pay for somebody else, right? But that is coded, that is layered. We're not paying for anybody else. This is for us. We are owning these systems. They are public systems. It's not a handout. We built this. This is ours. There are folks that are trying to completely purchase our political system, running as Republicans and now tossing in their hats as Democrats in the field as well. But what we're here to say is that in a democracy, it shouldn't matter how much money you have. What should matter is whether you vote, whether you caucus, whether you turn out. It's the numbers, it's the people, it's a movement. And when it comes to a Green New Deal, people say, always, always, always with this question of how are you going to pay for it? As though we're not paying for it now. As though the Midwest wasn't underwater this year. As though 3,000 Americans didn't die in Puerto Rico in Hurricane Maria. As though Hurricane Katrina didn't happen. As though sea levels aren't rising. As though California isn't on fire. How do we pay for that? The way we pay for this is with a people-powered movement. We're going to come together, invest our systems, and decide that instead of paying for our destruction, we're going to pay to come together and rebuild this nation. Thank you very much. And with that, I introduce to you our brother, my tío in this movement, Senator Bernie Sanders.